and welcome to the Women and Financial Wellness segment. My name is Oliver Gray, CEO of Project Come Up. I want to introduce you to some of our amazing teammates at Project Come Up, but first, I want to intro to what Project Come Up is and why. Project Come Up was built in June last year out of necessity. It was really built after the murder of George Floyd, and it was built knowing that the system is not broken, it's just not built for Black and brown people. We came to this opportunity understanding that we need to build something that was built for our community and something that would help lift our community. Systematic racism has multifacets. What we want to tackle ourselves was career development and financial literacy. Some of the reasons why we felt that was evident were in our day-to-day lives and what we experience in our education system, but also is proof in the stats here. You see that when we're talking about financial literacy, the average American has a below average financial literacy testing score. They can't pass a financial literacy test. But when you drill it down to the African American population, we come up short versus our white counterparts. What we wanted to do was really build a program that teaches financial literacy and career development from the ground up. And that's what Project Come Up is all about. Project Come Up partners with Investopedia, CNN, and CNN Business, and LinkedIn to help provide this type of content for young adults in the biopic community. Our mission is really that, to help bring up our community, and it's really done by a two-pronged approach. The first prong is a mentee-mentor partnership focused on career development. The second prong is a self-led mentee financial literacy curriculum that really focuses on the individual understanding the need for financial literacy. We believe that if we invest in you, our community, then our community will be more willing to invest in themselves. A little deeper picture of what we are. Project Come Up really is that two-pronged system, as I mentioned. The first prong is that really is the seed investment that is the $2,000 brokerage account that is given to each mentee. This brokerage account is funded by the mentor and a financial partner. So $1,000 and $1,000 to each $2,000 to each mentee. And the mentee is encouraged throughout a 12-month program to understand the values of financial education, everything from savings, how to protect themselves from harmful tactics, credit card tactics, to at the end being able to invest and utilize those $2,000 in a useful, strategic manner. At the same time of the 12-month period, the mentee or mentor will be going through their career development segments. This is talking about resume building, mock interviews, conversations around imposter syndrome, and understanding what it means to be sometimes the only person of color in your office or in your community. Throughout the 12-month year-long process, we hope that to encourage our mentees to understand the values of long-term investing, how to save money, how to protect the funds that they have coming in, also to be encouraged and empowered to move forward and carve out a career that is successful for them and their interests. Now, Project Come Up is that is a program at its core. We're happy to share more information at projectcomeup.org, but we understand that our mission needs to be larger than just this core audience. So as we are building our program, we are reaching out to other audiences in different manners like this one to make sure we're providing helpful knowledge around financial literacy. We understand that the biopic community has its struggles with financial literacy, but so do women in the US. So what we want to do here is provide a sounding board to understand that you guys are not alone, and some of our members of our team here have faced some similar problems that you might face in your day-to-day life, and that's what we want to have a conversation around here. So in terms of conversations, we will be dropping these questions into the chat box, but as we start talking about who we are, we want you to think about these two questions. The questions are, how do you feel about your understanding of personal finance at this moment? And what is your greatest financial concern at this moment? Before we get into our segment, I want to talk a little bit about who we are, and I'll hand it off to the two stars of the program. My name is Oliver Gray. My day job is in Amazon advertising. I am the founder and CEO of Project Come Up, and in terms of advertising, I have sales experience at CNN, Discovery, and Slate before Amazon. As a passion, I have been compelled to really help close the wealth gap. That's the reason why we founded Project Come Up, to help our community rise up and better themselves. I would like to hand it over to Stephanie Yacenda.
Thanks, Oliver. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today. My name is Stephanie Yacenda. I've worked in finance for nearly a decade, specifically in the asset management industry, where I've worked on sales and marketing teams. My path to finance, though, is a bit unusual, as my background is actually in women's studies and not in finance or a business-related field. But what I'd like to focus on today is not my career or my path to finance, but rather my path to financial independence. And in order to talk about that today, I'd like to start off with two examples or stories that I think are important. First is related to my coursework. So as an undergrad, I was required to take and complete an internship. And the place I chose was a shelter for women and children. These women and children were seeking refuge from violent homes or violent spouses. And what I learned from my time there was that many women in the shelter were in these violent situations and were unable to get out because they didn't have the financial independence to go out on their own and also provide for their children. Most of the women that were in the shelter were responsible for much of the unpaid work that so many women around the world are responsible for. So one day, one of the residents came up to me. She asked if I could help her use a computer. So we sat down, and she wanted to build out her resume because she finally wanted to access the formal job market. So she needed to build a resume. She'd never seen a Word document. And so we built her resume, and she was able to start her career and her path toward financial independence. But what I learned, and I think there are two key points I'd like to stress here. The first being that money or lack of financial independence can actually be a form of violence. It can be limiting, and lack of access can keep women in violent situations, as I saw from my experience at the shelter. Secondly, education and access are key to gaining financial independence and to well-being. So the second story I'd like to share is actually about my mother. So my mother was a stay-at-home mom. She had 4 kids and stayed home for all 4 of us. And at one point, she'd expressed that she wanted to go back to work. I asked her why she didn't, and she explained that after a conversation with my father, that he actually didn't want her going back to work. And it made me start to wonder, my dad was a very supportive husband, but interesting that he wouldn't push my mom to do this. So the cost and the person who lost out in that situation was my mother. So she didn't pursue a career or other passions outside of being a mother or a wife. Some women, there's no judgment here. That is 100% what some women would like to do, but not having access or not having the social permission to pursue our passions is a limiting part of being a woman in our society. And what I learned in college and toward the end of my college career was that I was being groomed that same way. After college, the expectation was for me to get married, to have kids, and to be a stay-at-home mom and wife. That was not something I wanted. Again, no judgment on those who do. So it became imperative to me that I become financially independent. So my first step was to get a job in a good paying industry, hence finance. But really key, and what we'll explore in a little bit, is the importance of setting financial goals and then aligning yourself so you're able to achieve them. So the second message here that I'd like to focus on is that our relationship with money often has deep cultural and generational roots, and that part of your financial well-being and your path to financial wellness will be exploring some of those roots, and it can sometimes be uncomfortable, so definitely be prepared. Before I hand it over to Danielle, I'd like to touch on how I became involved in Project Come Up. So last summer, as Oliver mentioned, after the murder of George Floyd, and I attended several Black Lives Matter protests, and it reminded me of how important financial independence is for marginalized members of the Black and Brown community, as well as women. So as a member of the PCU advisory team, I'm interested in helping more women become financially independent, as I believe this is the path to living fully self-actualized lives. So with that, I hand it over to Danielle.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. As Stephanie mentioned, my name is Danielle Peart, and I'm a CPA licensed in the state of Massachusetts. I began my career at one of the big four accounting firms in Boston, Deloitte & Touche, have since transitioned to consulting, and now I'm a controller at a med device manufacturing company. I'm also an advisory board member for PCU. How I actually got involved in the program is one of my friends from college. She grew up with Oliver and knew that he was creating PCU and introduced us. So in my friend group, I'm the resident accountant. So all my friends used to ask me all the time what my investment strategy was, what stocks do I buy, and just general questions about budgeting and saving money. So after I gave them the same response to the question, I told them to read this book called The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins. After I told them that and realized that no one actually was reading it, I was like, you know what? The pandemic hit, I had some time on my hands, and I decided to create some slide decks to pretty much simply break down what was said in the book so that we could meet and discuss it and really create just a safe space to answer just the simple questions that they have, and I could provide answers. It was a 4-part course about budgeting, allocating your income, an investing overview, and a financial statement overview. And really, this was just meant to break it down into simple and digestible information. Financial literacy is super important to me, and I have spent so much time just educating my friends and my family alike just to spread the knowledge that I have. And I really just want to continue to spreading that to a wider audience, which is why I became an advisory member for PCU. Ultimately, I'm just an island girl from Jamaica. I wasn't born rich and I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth, but I'm definitely a living example that you can go from making that first $400 check at CVS to building sustainable financial wealth. Now I'll send it back over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Danielle. So first, we've already done our introductions. I'm going to address the imposter syndrome. Some of you may have heard of it before. I'm going to give some historical context, which is in theme with the summit. We're going to talk about spending habits. And then lastly, I'll go into creating a budget and the importance of establishing a budget. After that, I'll pass it back over to Danielle. She's going to walk through the importance of financial independence and financial literacy. She's going to discuss how to allocate your net income, and she's going to give a little bit of an investing overview. For those of you who might not know or have never heard of it, imposter syndrome refers to the pattern of behavior or thinking where a person doubts their success or their abilities despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. We want to acknowledge you and everyone who's taking steps toward their financial wellness and well-being because it can really bring up some feelings of personal doubt, uncertainty, or even discomfort. So if you're feeling any of that, know this is a safe space and that's an expected feeling to have. There are a number of factors that might contribute to this. I'll just go over a few briefly. Maybe you had a financially insecure, uncertain childhood, not knowing whether a parent would be able to have enough money for food, transportation, clothing. There might have been a fear of losing or not making enough money. You may not have ever had exposure to financial tools or education and might feel a little bit behind the curve in terms of your peers. You might feel out of control with money. Say you got a big paycheck, you don't know how to spend it, or how you might want to save but have no idea where to begin. And then lastly, you talk about scarcity thinking or having an aversion to risk. Investing is not without risk, but there are ways to do it in which you can do so safely for your long-term wealth, which Danielle will get into later. But so similar and I would like to say this just broadly, similar to any area of your personal well-being and wellness. Say, for example, you wanted to take a yoga class, right? At the end of that first session, you're not going to expect to be doing handstands at the end of it, right? So as you're going through your financial independence path, have patience with yourself. I think what is really key, and Danielle would agree, consistency is key. Continue showing up, continue to learn new tools that you maybe haven't had access to, and continue to push through any fears or insecurities you may have, because in the end, that consistency is what's going to pay off in the long term. So again, keeping with the theme of the summit, we want to highlight the power of HERstory. Women's stories are often untold, or sometimes they're diminished. Let's consider, for example, one of the most popular kind of women's movements accomplishments, the suffrage movement. Oftentimes the conversation around the suffrage movement is as if, men decided one day that they were being really unfair to women, and so they just gave us the right to vote. That is not what happened. It was after nearly a century of fighting, beginning in 1848, that women started fighting to earn and gain the right to vote. They protested, they had hunger strikes, they were imprisoned and physically abused. So women's path to access to anything, right, whether it's financial rights, whether it's their freedom, whether it's legal rights, has been a fight tooth and nail. But that's meant to give you some encouragement, right? You're coming after a long line of women who've been fighting. So it's a bit of an urge and call to action to fight for your own rights and for your own independence. It's also important to remember that women are not a monolith. And in the United States, we have a deep history of racism in our country and in our systems. So how women of different races are affected is important to keep sight of and to remind ourselves of, is how women relate to the systems and exist within different social systems is important. And it has informed the ways in which women have fought for their rights. So for example, as early as 1839, white women were fighting for the right to own property in their own names. In 1848, they were pushing for legislation so that a wife wasn't responsible for their husband's debt. While just a year after that, Harriet Tubman escaped from slavery. And she returned to the South, and many of you likely know her story, but she led over 300 slaves to freedom. So just kind of using that example to show that the access to systems is very important. Race cannot be taken out of that conversation. So as we think of our HERstories, remember the legacy of racism in our country and the negative impact it might have had on the Black and Brown community. And while there have been over the years attempts to increase access and improve access to different systems, as Oliver pointed out, the systems were not built for the members of the Black and Brown community. So that's why programs like Project Come Up are so incredibly important, because we are not only focusing on the Black and Brown community, but we also have our eye on women within these spaces. So our program is really designed to look at financial literacy from the very beginning, from every level. We start off at spending habits, just kind of getting used to, how should you be spending money? What's the most efficient way to do so? And all the way to looking at the stock market and how to potentially start investing. Okay, so spending habits. What is a spending habit? Really, it's just a behavioral pattern that you have that's related to how you spend your money. Establishing efficient and healthy spending habits is incredibly important when you're working toward your path to financial independence and well-being. If you take nothing else from the lesson today, I want to leave you with this, which is set financial goals. Always have a goal in mind for whatever it is you're working toward. I did this when I first moved out of school. When I first left school, I wanted to move out on my own. Maybe that's a similar goal of yours. Or maybe you're a mother and you have kids and you want to save enough so that you're able to help pay for a summer camp or a summer learning program. These are great goals to set and to examine your spending habits as you approach them over time. So we categorize spending habits as efficient and inefficient. We really want to remove good or bad labels because this is not a good or bad behavior. It's just whether your spending habits will get you there efficiently or maybe inefficiently. So an inefficient habit, for example, would be overspending, leaking money, which we'll go into in the following slides, and impulsive spending. More efficient habits would be spending within your means, plugging those money leaks, and controlling your emotional or impulsive spending. So let's get into the first of these, which is overspending. So one of the most difficult challenges I had was to stop overspending. I had this habit of leaving work, and on my way home, I'd pop into a store. I love TJ Maxx, that's my go-to, or Target, and I'd buy all sorts of decor. I'd spend $40 here, $60 here, and that added up over time. So in order to achieve that goal that I'd set for myself, which was moving out and to live financially independent of my parents or any man, I needed to get this spending under control. So what I did was I set out a list of my needs and my wants. And you can see here on our slide here that there are different categories, and most people's needs tend to fall in the same categories. Transportation, housing, insurance, your gas and electric bills, and food. Where people will differ is in their wants. The best place to start is to go with a list of your needs and wants that are very specific to your lifestyle and to your family or whatever expenses that you have. So the next habit is a money leak. Okay, so what is a money leak? It might be one you're less familiar with. What does that mean? So leaking money refers to unplanned and non-necessity spending. What I've come to think of as mindless spending. In the same way we have mindless eating, there's mindless spending. So if we keep with this example of me going to TJ Maxx after work and spending money on things I didn't need, I would spend a few hours and really lose those few hours that I should have been spending grocery shopping or spending money on my needs. And then by the time I left, I'd be starving. And I didn't have dinner planned. I didn't have any groceries at home. And so on my way home, I would order in. And sometimes I would order in from my roommate. And again, those costs just start to add up over time. And with a little bit of planning, I was able to reverse some of those inefficient habits and start to plug those money leaks. So if you're someone like me who likes to kind of go into discount shops, it's great to set up rules around your spending. So instead of going into the store with your credit card, maybe go in with a fixed amount of money and know that, okay, that's within your budget and what you're willing to spend, and you won't go beyond that. Credit cards make it incredibly easy to spend beyond your means. This is a great way to kind of limit that spending. Maybe you're someone who splurges and you get your payday check and you're just like, okay, I got to go shopping. A great tactic for this is to implement a 24-hour rule or a 48-hour rule where you put it down on a list. And then if it's not a non-necessity item, you give it a full day, 2 days before you go back and make that purchase. So this is a good segue into that last sort of inefficient habit that we have, which is splurging or emotional spending. The best tools to deal with this are in implementing this 24, 48-hour rule that gives you time to think about your other financial goals and whether this is actually aligned with what it is you're trying to accomplish in the long term. And secondly, you can do a time to cost ratio. So when you look at an item, maybe it's a pair of boots or a jacket, or maybe it's a restaurant you want to try, consider how much time that will take in order to pay off that purchase. And when you start to look at your money as time, you start to kind of make decisions differently, and that's part of those incremental behavioral changes that we encourage you to start to make. So after you've gone through your spending habits, you've identified areas where you could be more efficient with your money, a great next step is to create a budget. I don't know about you. I'm not really a money person. I never have been. So this advice, my brain kind of just stops when I hear create a budget. So I've broken this down into 2 points that I think are worth emphasizing and why you should really give creating a budget a chance. First, a budget helps you keep track and accomplish those financial goals that you set. It's essentially a roadmap on how you're going to get to your ultimate financial destination. If you ever veer off course, maybe you fall back into some of those inefficient spending habits, you can return to your roadmap and get back on track quickly. The second point and the second area I'd like to emphasize is that a budget ensures that you're not overspending or spending outside of your means. As I mentioned just a second ago, credit cards and payment plans have made it increasingly easy to spend outside of your means. By creating a budget, you're able to stay within those means and not fall or risk falling into debt and credit card debt. And you may already have student loans you're paying off. You want to really limit the amount of debt that you're taking on. So how do we create a budget? Again, this is really a dialed down version, and I'm just gonna talk about the top line ways that you create a budget. And key in creating a budget is looking at your net income. So first you've pulled together all your sources of income. So that's your paychecks, any dividends or interest earned on your investments. And second, you bring all of your expenses together. So that might be your rent, your mortgage, groceries, your electric bills, maybe costs for children if you have, and you combine those together. So you take your total income and you subtract your total expenses. That leftover money is your net income. And that is where any planning to save, build a future, build an emergency fund, invest, all of these options, which Danielle will take you through in a moment, is what that money is there for. So before I hand you over to Danielle, I just want to go through a few reflection points and that I'd like to leave you with. So first, make sure you stay curious. Continue to approach your personal finances like a student. Approach your wellness with patience and compassion. And lastly, do not forget to always set financial goals. So with that, I'll hand it over to Danielle to take you through the importance of financial independence.
Thanks, Steph. That was some great insight. So Steph pretty much talked about how to budget and calculating your net income. So I'll first start off by talking about the importance of financial literacy and independence, and then what to do with that net income that you've calculated. And then we'll get into a little bit of an investing overview. So let's dive in. The importance of financial literacy and independence. That is very near and dear to my heart. I grew up in a household where financial independence was stressed. My parents didn't grow up with a lot of money, and I didn't either. So seeing their sacrifices and how hard they worked really had an imprint on me as a child. If we talk about money and wellness, the amount of stress I witnessed my parents go through about money, even into my adult life, that was really a defining factor for me. From my personal experience, stress can have such a debilitating impact on your mood, your eating habits, and just overall. And I told myself then that I'd work my butt off, not having to depend on anyone for anything, especially for money. Of course, my parents are great. They'd give me whatever they had. But I remember back then even feeling not wanting to be a burden for them. So even as a kid, I was super aware of finances because money was tight. That's why now I really take it upon myself to help others become financially literate, because that opens so many avenues for us. It's so freeing not having to worry about money, and it really frees up space in your mind, literally, to think about other important things for your life. Financial literacy helps us on our journey to financial freedom, which ultimately allows us to live the life that we want. Regardless of financial status, it's important for a woman to have her own. Relationships are amazing and partnerships are great, but we also have to have a plan for the what ifs. What if those end? Just be realistic. It's important to have that security plan in place for yourself and your family in case something were to go awry. Before we dive into the next slides, I'd just like to give a disclaimer about the information. This information, it's not all encompassing. It's merely meant to be an educational tool. Investing at its core, as Steph mentioned earlier, it's a risk and it's a decision that you have to make for yourself if you choose on your personal financial journey. Okay, so let's get started. How do you allocate your net income? After you've budgeted, you've paid all your bills, taken care of all your financial responsibilities, and you've bought those cute shoes that you like, what do you do with that money that you have left over? You build an emergency fund. You never know what tomorrow may bring. An emergency fund is really there to help you with unforeseen expenses. Your car may break down, a relative may get sick, who you take care of, and you have to pay those medical bills. You just never know. An emergency fund is really a savings account of money that you don't touch, unless, of course, there's an emergency, as the name suggests. Some gurus recommend having enough money to cover 6 to 8 months of expenses. Some even recommend having enough there to cover 12 months worth of expenses. Like many people last year, what if when the pandemic hit, you lost your job? An emergency fund would have been an extra security blanket to hold you over until you were able to get back on your feet. Personally, my emergency fund is with Marcus by Goldman Sachs. It's one of the top yielding interest rate accounts right now, and it's an online bank account. So I don't have an ATM card to go to the bank and take money out. If an emergency were to occur and I needed the money, I could transfer that from that savings account to my checking account and get the money within a day. But again, having it as an online account is an added deterrence for me to not take the money out. You can utilize Google and NerdWallet to search right now the top yielding high interest rate savings accounts to find the right bank for you to build your emergency fund. Then we'll flip it over to number 2. Get rid of debt. This is plain and simple. Debt is a ball and chain and can literally stress you out. So rank your bills. Ultimately, it comes down to what makes the most sense for you. Does it make sense to get rid of the biggest bill, the one with the highest outstanding amount? Or does it make sense to get rid of the bill with the highest interest rate first? Take stock of that, do that math, play around a little bit with it. Which scenario works best for you? What ultimately would result in you paying the less amount of money out of your pocket to pay those bills back? So even though a bill may have a smaller balance, that interest rate may be super high and it may just compound year after year and snowball into an amount that you just can't afford. So just be cognizant of that when you're ranking your bills to pay them off. Continue to contribute to your regular savings account after you've built your emergency fund and after you've paid off your debt. A lot of people wonder, okay, how much money do I allocate to paying off my debt versus saving? How much money do I save in general? That's ultimately up to you. No amount is too small. Pretty much the earlier you start, the better, because compound interest is a beautiful thing. Time is on your side, and we have to take advantage of that. The earlier we start, the better. Save for yourself, save for your kids, your family. Honestly, whatever goal you have, save for that. And ultimately, if you have any amount of money left over once you've paid all your bills, or if you don't have enough money after that, you go back to your budget, reassess. Do I need to decrease any of my expenses, or do I need to figure out other ways to make more income so that I have more money left over so that I can then ultimately end up investing? Pretty much it's a constant reassessment just to figure out where you are so that you can make the best decisions for yourself. And if you have any money left over beyond, we can dive into investing. Investing seems like such a daunting thing. I remember, even as someone with an accounting background, I had to start from scratch myself. Yes, I knew what a stock was, I knew what financial statements were. Accounting is something completely different than finance. And I can only imagine if I have an accounting background and I had to do my own research and dig in to teach myself and build up my knowledge and read a lot of books about it. I can only imagine what someone else has to do without that background. So again, it's really daunting, and that alone is a barrier to entry. If investing was taught and if it was broken down into simple terms so that everyone could understand and made accessible to everyone, then there would be so many more players in the market. don't beat yourself up. We all have to start somewhere. The key here, and which is what PCU tries to do, is really arm you with these tools so that you can dive in, do additional research for yourself to get and find out the best strategy that works for you. Ultimately, there's no magic secret to this. Start with a 401k when you invest. A lot of you may already have this, or you may even have it and not know that that's a form of investing. So a 401k is pretty much a company-sponsored retirement account that you can contribute to. It's called a 401k because it's named after the section of a code in the IRS. Tax advantages of this: your earnings are not taxed until you withdraw them later when you decide to retire, or if you have to withdraw them for whatever reason beforehand. To buy a house, typically, that's a typical example there. And your contributions aren't included in your taxable income when you do your tax return. So if you have a 401k already, you've already been investing, because when you contribute that money is used and allocated against certain stocks that may already be predetermined by your company. Or if you remember, you may have had to go in and choose specific stocks within certain funds. Typically, too, companies would provide a match. So that's free money here. So if they provide a match, if you can, try to max this out. The limit for this year is $19,500. So if you have the funds, definitely this would be a way to go. So after you invest in your 401k, you have the option to open up a Roth IRA. And an IRA is an individual retirement account where you pay the tax now. So when you retire and you withdraw that funds, that will be tax free. You won't be taxed then. So it's pretty much the flip of a 401k. The difference pretty much comes down to tax rate. If you think the tax rate's going to go up in the future, you'd want to pay the tax now, which is go the Roth IRA route. If you think it'll go down in the future, max out the 401k. But essentially potato. And I've listed out here the contribution limits and by age. But ultimately, this is just another avenue to invest those funds. And similar to a 401k, when you put that money in a Roth IRA, you then get to select the funds and the stocks that you invest in. All right, so once you've invested in that 401k, max that out, once you've done the Roth, then if you have some more money left over and some more money to play with, open up a brokerage account with any of the large banks. Literally the Vanguards, the Fidelity, the E-Trade, Robinhood. Really, there are so many more. Google's your friend. Use NerdWallet. But these are really some of the big ones that most people talk about. So a brokerage account really is just a vehicle to purchase and sell stocks and bonds, really investments. And you fund this account with cash from your savings or your checking account, and you can open up one online. The beauty about investing is that time's on your side. Once you put that money in, it'll grow with the market, it'll compound year after year and build up its balance. So your 401k or Roth IRA, if it's with Vanguard or if it's with Fidelity, why not just open up your brokerage account there so you have all your money in one place? So we've talked about investing in that order. Now, because we've touched on investing, I'd like to give it a brief overview of investing overall. Let's talk about the market. As I was saying before, even though I have an accounting background, I had to dig into this and do my own research. So when people talk about stocks and bonds, that may seem a little daunting, but this is really, in the financial markets, this is how people invest. This is where people are investing. So when we talk about the financial market, if we take the financial aspect out of it, it's really just a market. And ultimately, what's a market? It's really a place where people just go to buy and sell things. So if we're thinking about a financial market, it's where people go to buy and sell financial assets such as stocks and bonds, and which that's ultimately called trading when you're buying and selling stocks and bonds. So you, as the investor, you buy a stock in a company, you pay your money, and that company uses your money to run or fund their company. And this usually comes at a cost to them. A lot of companies, they make monthly payments or quarterly or annual payments to investors for borrowing their money, which are called dividends. You get these dividends as a return, and when you invest in that stock, hopefully you'll also get a market return on those stocks if the company does well and based on trends in the market. The market averages a return of 6 to 7% over a 50-year period, and over a 10-year period, and over a 30-year period, it returns 10%. So we've talked about the market. Now let's get into a stock. Let's break down what that is. What's a stock? It's literally a piece or an ownership percentage of a company. It's literally called a stock because back in the day when people would buy a stock, they literally get a paper certificate saying you own XXX amount of shares of company XYZ. When you purchase a stock, you're the shareholder, the stockholder, the stakeholder, so many names for it, the equity holder, because when you buy that stock, you literally own a piece of the company, so you own equity in that company. You can buy stocks on a stock exchange, which means a company is publicly traded. So you can go in your brokerage account, Google or search that ticker. The ticker is the sign for the company. So like Apple's, for example, is AAPL. You search that ticker and get information about that company. But ultimately, the public is the one who invests in these stocks, and the public is the investor, which is ultimately you. So next we'll get into an overview of an index fund. What's an index fund? It's pretty much a bunch of stocks. When you buy a stock, that stock has an individual price, but an index fund is a bunch of stocks where those prices are all weighted to create one weighted price for that index fund. The top 3 most followed indices in the US are the S&P 500, which is stocks from the 500 large companies in the US, example Google, Amazon, etc. 2 is Dow Jones Industrial Average, stocks from only the largest 30 companies in the US. And then NASDAQ, where we have the 100 largest companies in the US. So when you invest in an index fund, you're essentially investing in all those companies in that index. It's an average. The return on your investment is literally based on an average of all those stocks included in that index. Now you know about the market, what a stock is, what an index fund is. Okay, but literally how do you invest and buy these things? Determine what brokerage online account you want to use and then open it. So again, that's the Vanguard, that's the E-Trade, the Robinhood, etc. This is a personal choice. Like I was saying earlier, if you have a 401k or a Roth IRA already, might as well keep your money in one place and create and open up a brokerage account with the company where your 401k or IRA is with already. For example, if you choose Vanguard and you choose to buy Vanguard funds or a Vanguard index fund, you won't have to pay commissions on that because if you have a Vanguard brokerage account, you won't, it's in-house, so you won't have to pay any commission fees on that. But if you say you're with Vanguard and you want to buy like a Fidelity fund, then you'd have to pay the commission fees. So there's some benefits to, if whatever reason for whatever stock you want, if you want an in-house stock, then you get to waive those commission fees if you have that particular brokerage account. Ultimately, once you've determined what brokerage account you want to use, you link your bank account to that brokerage account. Then you transfer money from your bank account to the brokerage account. You search for the ticker of whatever stock you want. And then you just ultimately click on buy, and you're able to buy that stock or that index fund or whatever investment you choose. So that's ultimately a quick overview. Again, this is not meant to be all encompassing. It's literally just meant to arm you with some tools so that you can dig in further, and then do some real research to make the best decisions and choose what avenues you want to go down. So then, just to cap it all up, we'll talk about mindset. Mindset is super important. As Steph was saying earlier, you have to create goals, create these financial goals to achieve them. Ultimately, you want to be assessing those goals, whether it's weekly, monthly, quarterly. Companies do this. Companies send out their financial statements monthly, quarterly, annually. They do their budgeting periods, months in advance. So if companies are doing this, why shouldn't individuals be doing that too? For me personally, I take stock every month. I don't like to get too obsessive with it. So, because that can also be detrimental, just watching the money go up and down as the market fluctuates. Decide what cadence is best for you and make sure you're checking in and assessing how your money's doing. In addition to actually looking at the numbers, I assess how it's impacting my life overall. How is it affecting me physically, mentally, emotionally? Am I stressed about a purchase? Am I stressed about, do I have to help out a family member? Can I afford that? So, in addition to the money aspect of it, also assess how it's making you feel and impacting you overall. Ultimately, do what's best for you and your life plan. What's best for you or what's best for the next person isn't going to be best for you. Everyone has a different journey to financial freedom. So do what's best for you. Do your research, utilize the tools we've listed on the resource slide, which will come after this. And just use this as a start. This is not meant to be all encompassing. It's meant to just provide some overview so that you can take that and choose the direction or the path that's best for you. Use apps to help you track and organize your finances, Mint, Honeydew, for example. Follow financial forums on social media like us. Some Instagram handles are noted below of key places that I follow or key handles that I follow. And ultimately, think long term. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. You can't build financial wealth overnight. If you build it quickly, more than likely it's gonna be gone just as quick. It's possible, but most of the people think long term and they build their wealth over a long term. And that's it.
Thank you, Danielle, as well as Steph, for your passionate and personal stories, as well as your insightful financial inputs. That is it for this Women and Financial Wellness segment. However, there are a wealth of resources that we want to point to you all to continue your journey. Similarly to us at Project Come Up, we understand that this is only the start of your financial journey. So there's a wealth of resources, as we mentioned, that could be helpful, whether it's projectcomeup.org or The Motley Fool, Investopedia, or Financial Feminists, which is a great podcast that could really resonate with some stories that might be familiar with you guys now. I want to thank again Stephanie and Danielle on our team here. Appreciate everything that you guys do here during this segment, as well as behind the scenes at Project Come Up. To everybody who's watching, make sure to follow us. We are only just growing, so it's Project Come Up official on Instagram and Twitter, and it's projectcomeup.org on the website, and you can join our mailing list there. Peace out, and thank you so much.